All right. Good evening. Mazel tov, Rabbi Yitz. Beautiful siyum. Thank you very much. We're going to be learning Maseches Kesubos Daf Kaf Hey. We're starting 2/3 of the way down on Chav Daled Amud Beis, and we're in the midst of a sugya as to whether or not we can determine that a person is a kohen based on Nesias Kapayim. Someone walks up to the front of the room in Eretz Yisrael any day, here in America, on Chutz La'aretz, on the Yamim Noraim, Yamim Tovim, when people do Nesias Kapayim, are we allowed to infer from there that a person is a Kohen? And says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rava, Mahu leha'alos minesius Kapayim leyuchsin. Are we allowed to say that I'm able to see this person duchening, and therefore I can assume that he is a Kohen miyuchas? Says the Gemara, Amar le plukta derv chizah v'Rav Avinu. Well, had we been learning this in flow yesterday, we would have seen that this is a ridiculous question. We literally just discussed it like the lines before. So says the Gemara, I know there's a machlokes about it. Hilchas samai. I want to know what the halacha is. So then the response from Rava was, Amar le anamas nisa yadana. All I can tell you is that I know a Mishnah, and this Mishnah quotes a pasuk as follows: the Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, and then we learn a pasuk that speaks a lot about the Beis Hamikdash when the Jews were coming back from Bavel, and when the Jews were living in that time space, there was some very bad intermarriages happening. It wasn't Gishmak. The pasuk reads. Let me just find the pasuk with all the nakudas here so I don't butcher it. The pasuk reads, "Umi bnei hakohanim bnei chavaya bnei hakotz bnei barzilai asher lakach mi benos barzilai agiladi isha v'yikarei al shemam." They were looking for their own family histories, and they were nigal from the kahuna. They were saved in some way. You're not allowed to eat from the Kodesh HaKodashim. So these are families from the Kohanim. They came up back to Eretz Yisrael to try and rebuild the next Beis Hamikdash. However, they were only allowed to eat select foods, and here's what the Gemara now says about that. We don't really know your halachic status. We have questionable halachic statuses about these kohanim. Now we're 2,000 years later. There's not such a pashut azach to say that we're 100% kohanim. So there are families that are kohanim yuchasim. They know the Rappaport family. There's families that go back to whoever the right person is in history to make sure that it's valid. Omar lahem. The Navi in this pasuk, it said to them, we are maintaining your chazaka, such that what? When you were living in Bavel, what did you eat? You were able to eat truma. You're still allowed to eat truma. Remember what we're trying to figure out. Can you learn from duchening to yuchsin for a kohen? Says the Gemara, if you are of the opinion that we're able to extrapolate from one doing Nesias Kapayim, and therefore he's considered a Kohen Miyuchas, that doesn't work. Because Hani Kevan de Parsi Adayo Asila Asokinu. Because these people, whether or not they were eating Truma, that was one sugya, but they were all duchening. So then for sure we should have said, it must therefore be that Nesias Kapayim is not a raya for Yuchsin. Says the Gemara, you cannot learn anything from this pasuk about Yuchsin at all, because Shani Hacha de Riach Hazkayu, the Chazaka here was bad because they all intermarried and we weren't sure who was who. Even the pasuk itself was saying that we have such a strong suffix, we need the Urim V'Tumim. If you don't say that they had a Riach Hazkayu, that their Chazaka was bad, then we would have in a related sugya, we would have had a problem. According to those who say that we are allowed to extrapolate from the Kohen eating truma to him being a Kohen miyuchas, well, then if that's true, then this pasuk says kevan da'achle betruma asila sokinu. Then the pasuk says that they should be kohanim miyuchasim just from the pasuk itself because they ate truma. That's what the pasuk reads. Ella, there must therefore be a problem with what's happening with them eating truma. Elalav mishum de reaches kayu, and because they are reaches kayu, therefore the fact that you're eating truma, we'll see why they're eating truma shortly. But basically, there's no way to ever infer from nesius kapayim to yuchsin. The problem is that we still need an answer to the question. We don't have it. We're going to be spending a lot of today discussing this. So let's turn to the top of Chaf Hey Amud Aleph and continue. We just undermined this whole entire brisa. So what does Gedola Chazaka mean? That's how the brisa began. The brisa that was in the name of Rabbi Yossi. It said Gedola Chazaka. The Chazaka was so great. What was the great Chazaka? Meikara in Bavel Achol B'Truma Derabanan Hashta Achol B'Truma D'Oraisa. Now they're eating Truma D'Oraisa when they came back to Eretz Yisrael. Is that what was going on? Maybe it was a little bit different. Hashtanami b'truma d'Rabbanan achol. Even now, even back in Eretz Yisrael, they were not eating truma d'oraisa. They were only eating truma d'Rabbanan, but truma d'oraisa lo achol. And says the Gemara, v'chimaskinan, when we make the jump to say mitruma lo yuchsin, when we say that we're able to extrapolate from a Kohen eating truma to the fact that he's a Kohen miyuchas, that's only b'truma d'oraisa, but b'truma d'Rabbanan lo maskinan. So really, it's not so clear what the Gedola Chazaka is that's going on here. We don't even know what they were eating. So it says the Gemara, Belamai Gedola Chazaka. What was the greatness of the Chazaka? So says the Gemara, the chazaka of this brisa that's quoted in the name of Rabbi Yossi is that the afal gav the ikal migzar mishum truma d'oraisa lo gazrina, that the chazaka was strong enough for these kohanim, even though these kohanim had questionable lineages. Still, they were able to eat truma d'Rabbanan, and we were not gozer on them that they couldn't eat truma d'Rabbanan lest they eat truma d'oraisa. So, in other words, the chazaka of these questionable kohanim was so strong that they were able to eat truma d'Rabbanan. That's what the conclusion of the Gemara. What about truma d'oraisa? They for sure cannot eat truma d'oraisa. That's for sure. But there's no gzeira d'Rabbanan limiting them from truma d'Rabbanan lest they eat truma d'oraisa. That's what the Gemara says the gzeira is. But the Gemara argues the whole premise because it would truma d'oraisa lo achol. We know that they ate truma d'oraisa, and that is based on the following pasuk, because v'haksiv, the pasuk says. The pasuk says, where is this? Asher lo yochel mi kodesh hakodashim, that they were not able to eat from the kodesh hakodashim, from the actual korbanos of kodshim. Says the Gemara, mi kodesh hakodashim udelo achol. What's the diuk? Truma d'oraisa achol. Their only limitation from the pasuk was kodesh hakodashim. So v'haraya, we see that these families with their questionable lineage were eating truma d'oraisa. We just said that no, they're only eating truma d'Rabbanan, and that was the great chazaka that they could eat the truma d'Rabbanan based on the chazaka of them being kohanim. Afal pi that there's no room b'tumim yet, we don't know. So then the brisa shows over here very clearly that maybe they were actually eating truma d'oraisa. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Tachi kamar, here's the right way to understand this pasuk. Lo b'midi di ikri kodesh. They were not able to eat any foods that were kodesh. Tichsiv v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. They might be a zar. They can't eat it. But lo b'midi di ikri kachim, nor could they eat kachim, not just kodesh, but even kachim. Tichsiv ubaskon kisel ish zar hi b'truma sa kachim lo sochal. She's not allowed to eat it. She too is a zar. She can't eat kachim. These kohanim cannot eat kachim either. And they weren't even allowed to eat from the standard pieces of the korban, the chazev v'shok. What's left to eat? It must only be truma d'Rabbanan. That's what the Gemara says. Is we therefore see, in conclusion of this whole first part of the Gemara, is that these kohanim that came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael in the times of Ezra, they had very questionable lineages. The Gedola Chazaka that the Brisa speaks about is a Chazaka that says, we know that you have a Chazaka that you are kohanim, therefore we will allow you to eat truma, but only truma d'Rabbanan. And as it relates to the question at hand, are we allowed to learn from Nesius Kapayim to Yuchsin, that if we see a Kohen doing an activity that's very Kohanic, he's standing there on the Duchan, so then the Gemara says, we have no raya from there so far. Let's try our second raya for the day. Third of the way down, approximately, maybe a little bit less, on Chav Hei Amud Aleph. Tashma, we have a Brisa. This is pretty clear. Chazaka lekahuna, Nesius Kapayim beBavel. In Bavel, they would do Nesius Kapayim. That was a raya brura that you were considered to be a Kohen. In Bavel, they actually vetted out Kohanim before they would go up to Duchen. I mean, not like in Shol, like on Rosh Hashanah, like no, not then. But they made sure, like you needed like a hall pass to be able to be a Kohen. It wasn't stam. You could just nowadays we have guests. We have guests now who we have no idea. We have no clue. And we hope that one of our Kohanim are miyuchasim. We hope that one of them is allowed to make the bracha. These are real shilas. Yeah, how can you go up there and make a bracha? Well, it's Nisr D'Rabbanan to make a bracha, but it's a mitzvah doris. Maybe we should say Savik brachos and just have the Kohanim go up there and duchen without the bracha. So clearly, we have a halachic assumption of how to establish a Kohen. It's all from these two blot of Gemara of how we make the jump from I think he's a Kohen to in fact he is a Kohen. So this brisa says explicitly that in Bavel, Nesius Kapayim was a raya for kahuna. Not only that, and the Brisa continues, "Ve'achilas chala b'Surya." This was also true for eating chala in Surya, v'chiluk matanos b'krachin, and for giving out portions of the animal in some of the cities. We're not going to focus on those pieces right now. Ketani mihas. What did we learn here in this Brisa? Nesius kapayim. My lava yuchsin. Don't we see from this Brisa that we see that a Kohen is doing Nesius kapayim in Babel, and that creates a chazaka of sorts for yuchsin? Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Litruma. Nesius kapayim allows him to eat truma. But the highest level of yuchsin is still something that we have yet to reach. Says the Gemara, that's not a good argument because this brisa had an equation in it. If the chala would teach us about yuchsin, maybe we should say the same about nesius kapayim. Says the Gemara, no, it's not correct. Lo, achilas chala gufa letruma. Achilas chala is only to teach us about truma. Why is this the case? Because halfway down, kasavar chala bisman azed derabbanan truma deoraisa. That according to this approach, according to this brisa, chala would be derabanan and truma would be deraisa. Umaskinan michala derabanan the truma deraisa. And when one has chala derabanan, we can make an inference about that person that they're kohanim, and therefore they are letruma deraisa, which is a big jump. But still, the Gemara says from this brisa that it seems to be the case. When we're mafresh chala, we just burn it. But really, when you're mafresh chala, you should be giving it to a kohen properly. It should be given to a kohen. If you can eat the chala, then you can also eat truma deraisa. We in theory need to spend time on that. How can it be that you have din derabanan of chala, that therefore he can eat truma deraisa? It's a very big jump. Okay. Anyways, as Rav Huna bered Rabbi Yoshua l'Rabbanan, as Rav Huna bered Rabbi Yoshua flipped everything over for the Rabbanan. We're going to learn about that case a little bit later. The Gemara kind of just says it as a foreshadow of sorts. And halfway down, we still haven't answered our question about a Kohen. How then do we know if Nesius Kapayim works to establish a person's yuchsin as a Kohen? Toshma, let's try again another brisa similar to the one prior. Chazaka lekehuna Nesius Kapayim. That's pretty clear. A chazaka for kahuna can be established by Nesius Kapayim, b'chilu granos be'Eretz Yisrael, and as well from giving out grain at the granaries to Kohanim in Eretz Yisrael. Ubesuria, uvechol makom sheshluchei rosh chodesh magin, in the locale of Syria, and in any city where the messengers of Rosh Chodesh could reach, in those places, Nesius Kapayim Raya. In those cases, Nesius Kapayim is considered testimony to the fact that a person's a Kohen. Avalo Chiluk Granos. In all of those other places, they didn't do Chiluk Granos, so they weren't giving out grains to people at the granaries, so therefore that you couldn't use it as a Raya. Ubavel Kisuria. This is actually a fascinating Gemara because it's really discussing whether or not Syria, which might be Syria. I don't know. What does the article say about that? What is Syria? Does it say that it's Syria? Anybody have it there?
No, not in the note.
Not in the note? Or there isn't? What does it say?
Although the course messengers did not reach Bavel, it was nevertheless treated in the communities near Israel. This was because there were courts in Babylon that.
I mean, that's about Bavel, but that's about Bavel.
It does not consider Syria to be part of Eretz Yisrael.
Right. Bavel Kisuria. Well, we'll see in a moment that that's not necessarily the case, but okay.
They talk about Syria and Avodah Zarah, don't they? We talk about that because the status is, but it implies that it's a border.
It's reachable by the shluchim, so it's within reach. This is a big machlokas in the poskim about Eilat. Is Eilat considered part of Eretz Yisrael or not? Was it part of Kibush? What? Oh, the borders. Yeah. The borders and the psukim. So when I was in YU, Rabbi Rakefet gave a shiur on this, about very detailed with Marim Makomos. I remember where I was sitting in the room and he was discussing it. I was like so shocked, like because I'm an American. What do I know? Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Yisrael. I didn't even think twice. But he's like, yeah, a lot might not really be part. Yeah, 2 days of Yontif, 1 day Yontif. There's a lot of nafkaminas. What? Oh, in Eilat? Yeah. Wowzers. Okay.
Yeah.
David's on fire tonight. David is as spicy as that chicken was that I just ate. What did you say? Oh, Aram Sova. Oh.
It's Syria. It's Syria. The Syrians call themselves right.
So the Gemara continues here in this brisa. We haven't gotten to the crux of it yet, but the Gemara continues that Rashba Gomer Af Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim Berishona Mipnei Shebezin Kvun Sham. Great historical note that in Alexandria there was actually a bezdin there. Now, what is the feature that we've been trying to focus on here? We're trying to figure out, can we learn from Nesius Kapayim to Yuchsin? So the Gemara says, Ktani mias Nesius Kapayim, my lav Yuchsin. Says the Gemara, lo lechala. We're not able to learn from this brisa where it references Nesius Kapayim that Nesius Kapayim can teach us about Yuchsin. It only teaches us about chala. Says the Gemara, how can that be? It has to be similar to chiluk granos, machiluk granos leyuchsin. Just like when a Kohen is able to receive his portions of grains at the granary Mary, that is an indicator of Yuchsin. Maybe we should assume the same off Nesius Kapayim Yuchsin. Says the Gemara, nope, lo chilugranos gufa lechala. It's only to teach us about chala. Why is that the case? Because says the Gemara 3/4 of the way down, kasavar truma bizman azed derabanan v'chala deoraisa. This is what the Tanakama holds, that he holds that truma is derabanan and chala is deoraisa. Umaskinan mitruma derabanan lechala deoraisa. It's the inverse of what we learned earlier. That according to this brisa, you can see a kohen who's eating truma derabanan, and therefore allow him to then have access to chala, which is deoraisa. Like the following dialogue that took place between Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua and the Rabbanan. Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua, Ashkachtinu leRabbanan bebei Rav. He was in the base medrash of Rav. The Yasve v'Ka'amre, and they were talking about the following. Even according to the one who says the truma bisman azez derabanan, well, that doesn't stop this shita from holding the chala as a din deoraisa. Sharei, after all, it took Zion 7 years shekibshu, 7 years of conquering of Eretz Yisrael. The Zion shechilku and nischayv b'chala v'lo nischayv b'truma. During that time, we see that they were chayiv and chala, but they were not chayiv and truma, and they're medayik from that historical note that yes, truma is derabanan, but really chala is still deoraisa. Ve'amina lehu ana, and Rav Huna bered Rabbi Yeshua piped up and said, "You guys all got this wrong. It's not correct." And in fact, we paskin like this Gemara that chala today is derabanan, and the Gemara reads, "Afilu leman damar truma bizman azeh deoraisa chala derabanan." And we do paskin this way. The Tanya, how do we know the chala is derabanan? And this is a great Gemara to learn during the 9 days. Bevoachem el haaretz. What does the pasuk mean when you come back to Eretz Yisrael? If what it means that chala will be deoraisa when people come back to Eretz Yisrael, when will that be? Just a few Jews. We're certainly in that case. Chicago is one of the biggest aliyah centers around the globe. We have so many people moving from Chicago to Eretz Yisrael. So it says the Gemara, if only a handful of people go up, maybe we should assume, therefore, that chala is deoraisa nowadays. Says the Gemara. That says the Gemara, all the Jews have to be there in order for there to be a din deoraisa of chala. Till that time, it's going to be derabanan. Ezra, and when Ezra went up to Eretz Yisrael, as we turn to the top of Chaf Amud Aleph, lav kul hu saluk. Not everybody left. It is so hard to imagine that in our era. Like, if we knew that we had an Ezra, maybe they didn't know. I don't know, but like if we knew, we would be like, oh my gosh, we would swim. We would figure it out. And says Rashi, just to give us some of the sad history. Rashi says, la kul hu saluk rubo nisharu bebavel. Most of the people stayed back in Babel, reminiscent of the times of Mitzrayim, when only a fifth of the Jews actually left Mitzrayim. We get so complacent in where we live. Some of the Meforshim, more modern day Meforshim, write about people who are building their homes, and they're like, and the language, I can't remember if it's the Rokeach, I can't remember exactly what it was. I heard this many years ago. He writes that it's ki'ilu shachach de adayin anu begolos. This like very like, do people remember? Like, no, we've made our whole world like we're all guilty of it. This is our whole world. It's such an affluent world. We're like, no, we're good. Well, wallpaper. All of us. We're so like swallowed by it. But that's the psychology. It's hard to imagine that this happened, but it's happened multiple times throughout our history where most Jews don't return. It's very hard to understand. Let's just all go. When the time comes, Mashiach's it's gonna be great. Top of Chaf Amud Beis, we still haven't answered our question, so we have another brisa. Toshma chazaka lekahuna nesius kapayim mechilu granos ve'edus. So this brisa is still slightly different than the others, and here it adds in something funky, which is it adds in edus. What does that mean? Edus chazaka. Edus. Why? What is this doing in the Mishnah? Elalav hachi kamar nesius kapayim ki edus. Nesius kapayim is like edus. Ma edus lo yuchsin. Just like edus. If you have Eidim that say that a person is a Kohen, that's very different than trying to extrapolate from Nesius Kapayim. So it says the Gemara, Ma'idus liuchsin af Nesius Kapayim liuchsin. So therefore, maybe we have a beautiful raya to our question of whether or not we can infer from Nesius Kapayim to Yuchsin, and it seems to be that we would be able to. Says Gemara, lo, no. This is Eidus haba mikoach chazaka ki chazaka. This is talking about something else, that Eidus that comes about from a chazaka is like a chazaka. And that's very wordy. Let's see what this means. Says the Gemara, a little bit of stories. There was a person who came in front of Rav Ami. Amar le, and he said to him, Muchzekani bozeh shu kohen. I know that this guy, Ploni Almoni, is actually a kohen. Amar le marois. What evidence can you show to tell me that this, in fact, this person's a kohen? Amar le, I was in shul this morning, and Shekara Rishon b'Beis HaKnesses. They called him up and they gave him Rishon. So Rav Ami says back to B'chezkas shu kohen or B'chezkas shu gadol. Right? Did he get Kohen did he get Rishon because he's a Kohen, or was he the biggest Talmud Chacham in the room? So it says the Gemara, Shekara Achrav Levi, that we know. If you're going to be calling up Rishon to be anything other than a Kohen, then you can call a Levi, that's fine. But Sheni will never be a Levi also. The only way to have a Levi is if there's a Kohen in the room. You can have a Levi be Rishon if there's no Kohen in there, but a Levi being second, there's only two scenarios when that happens. It happens when there's a Kohen or when there's only Leviim in the room. That's it. There's no other iterations of it. Says the Gemara, well, because the Levi was after him, so therefore the Gemara says, and therefore we establish this person as a Kohen. This is an example of looking at a halachic chazaka based on what the person was doing in shul. So we extrapolated that because this guy got Rishon and because the second guy got Levi, the harai that he must be a Kohen. Another story, 10 lines down. Similar story that took place in front of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. I know that this particular person is a Levi. How do you know that this person is a Levi? Because he got the second aliyah in shul. Says the Gemara, how do you know? Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi asks, maybe he was the second greatest person in the room. They gave Rishon to a great guy, and he's the second great guy. It says the Gemara, Shekara lefan of Kohen. Right? So we're just doing math. We're like doing these equations, and it has to be now that I think he's a Levi and the first guy was a Kohen. Now all the pieces click together, and says the Gemara, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Lelevia al Pi. Here as well, we were able to make an inference, and therefore he was established to be a Levi. Another story. I have a raya brura that this person is considered a Kohen. What is the evidence that you have that this person is a Kohen? Because he got Rishon. It's great that you saw what happened in Shul, but Granos is much bigger. So did you see him at the granary? And the Gemara responds with a retort. Amar lo Rabbi Lazar, kahuna. If there is no granary to be had, you can't infer from him not having gone to the granary that he isn't a Kohen, right? It's like backwards evidence. He didn't go to the granary, so he's not a Kohen. Maybe he didn't need, maybe he didn't want, maybe whatever, maybe the logistics, maybe he couldn't walk. So it says the Gemara that's not a good argument. We would rather look at his aliyah status in shul and learn from there, again, with other pieces, not just that he got Rishon. It has to be Rishon followed by Levi. There's circumstances that have to be, the boxes that have to be checked off. So then the Gemara says, continuing with another part of the story, we left that question as a rhetorical one. Zimnin, there were times where Havu Yasve came to Rabbi Yochanan. These two people who were talking would sit in front of Rabbi Yochanan. This is, who was talking here? This is Reish Lakish and Rabbi Lazar. So the two of them, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Lazar, would sit in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Very similar story came about. We were talking about this guy, the Kohen, and whether or not he went to the Granos. Did you see that this person collected any grains at the Goren to establish that he's actually a Kohen? Rav Yochanan, who was the Rebbe. Rabbi Lazar was a 3rd century Amora. Rav Yochanan was the end of his first and second centuries. So then Rav Yochanan, his Rebbe, said, "V'mein sham Goren bat la kahuna." So then Hadar Chazia, the Rabbi Lazar Bishus, he made a face at Reish Lakish made a face at Rabbi Lazar, because in the previous part of the story, Rabbi Lazar was the one who said, what about the Goren? And Reish Lakish did not know that line had come from Rav Yochanan, and he was like embarrassed when this whole thing played out, because he wished he would have known that. Omar, Shamas Mili Davar Nafcha, there's something that came out of the mouth of Bar Nafcha, which is Rav Yochanan. V'lo Amrslan Mishmei, and when you quoted it, Rabbi Lazar, you didn't even quote it in his name. That's not right. You got to quote it in his name. Okay, last story for the day. This will wrap up to the top of the Gemara. Rabbi V'Reb Chad Ha'ela ben Alpiv. There was a boy who was established to be a Kohen by his father. And one person was verified to be in the camp of Levi by his brother. Tistayim, we can conclude, the Rebbe was the one who was Ha'ela ben Alpi Aviv LeKahuna. where a son was verified by his father to be a Kohen. Where do we see this? Tanya, 2 lines before the wide lines, Chaf Ham with Beis. Tanya, the Brisa writes, this is my son, and he's a Kohen. Rebbe kind of straddles the fence. It's not so simple. And he says that we trust the father enough that the child can eat truma, but not enough that he could marry a woman who's a miyuchas, who is only marrying a Kohen miyuchas. Divrei Rebbe. Amar lo Reb Chia, your answer doesn't make sense. Why are you straddling the fence here? Im ata ma'aminu lahachila b'truma. If you trust your opinion enough to say that he's allowed to eat truma, ta'aminu lahasio isha, then he should also be able to marry a woman who's a miyucheses. V'im iyata ma'aminu lahasio isha, and if you don't, then lo ta'aminu lechol b'truma. Then you don't, one way or the other. You should be living in one camp, not in 2 camps. If you trust him for truma, you should trust him for marriage. If you don't trust him for marriage, you shouldn't trust him for truma. Amar le, Rebbe says back, ani ma'aminu lahachila b'truma shabiyatu lahachila b'truma. That's a technical thing. He can take a piece of truma and give it to his kid. That's fine. And because he can't actually control in this moment giving him a wife, that's just not something that he can logistically do. We can therefore conclude that this case is a case of Rebbe. And because Rebbe was the one who was able to establish that his son was a Kohen, at least to the degree that he could eat truma, then the only other option left for Reb Chia is that that it must be that Reb Chia was the one who was able to establish that his brother was a Levi. Reb Chia Maishna ben Delo. Why is it that he didn't agree with Rebbe's case? Because because he's a father and a son. Says the Gemara, if that's what he was concerned about, my brother is also my relative. So says the Gemara on the top of Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, and this gets into a very lamdish sugya that we have no time for, but Mesiach lefi tumo. Mesiach lefi tumo is when a person makes a comment innocently and in passing. It's not something that we're deeply worried about because he said it purely, and therefore we trust him. For example, top of Chavav Amud Aleph, Ki hada amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, Ma'aseh ba'adam echad shei mesiach lefi tumo. A person was just talking in passing, and here's what he said: V'amar, oh, zichrani, I remember kshani tinok, when I was a young child, umurkov al ksefo shel abba, and my father was carrying me. It doesn't literally mean that he was carrying him; it just means that he was a child walking with his father. He took me out of school one day. It was amazing. And he took me to the mikvah to make sure that I was tahor, and then I was able to eat truma that night. Now, if he's just telling this story casually, what does that tell you about his father? His father's a Kohen. So the Gemara is saying when a person is talking mesiach lefi tumo, it's just casual, innocent conversation with no ulterior motives. It's super trustworthy. In fact, in halacha, we sometimes would believe a goy when they say things that are mesiach lefi tumo, when they don't even know what they're saying, that it could even have halachic implications. They don't know. They have no idea. I'll give you a ledugma. Let's say that a person says that the glycerin that we're using is from fish because it's cheaper than pigs. So what, in his head, he doesn't know. He's not holding in kashrus. So givaldik, now I know that it's fish gelatin. That's so much better than pig gelatin. So I'm just giving that as an example. So anyways, the story continues here. Reb Chia actually adds a little bit to the story and says, V'chaveirai bedilin mimeni, my friends, they couldn't even be near me because I was a Kohen. Vayukoron Yochanan ochel chalos. What was my nickname? The boy who ate the holy breads. Now, what was that? Again, same thing. It's Mesiach lefi tumo, and therefore v'haleu Rebbe lekahuna al piv. He was therefore trusted to be a Kohen. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow at 8:40. I'm going to overlearn this week a little bit. We're going to do an extra blot probably tomorrow night, and the next night an extra half blot each night, and then we're also probably going to have shiur Friday morning. And then on Tisha B'Av day, we'll have no learning at all, but we'll be caught up as of Shabbos. So we're going to learn Sunday's blot on Shabbos just to be all evened out, so there's no stressors on Tisha B'Av. Wishing you all a beautiful night.